Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to a special show today. It's special because this one is topical. We're doing the damn commandments. This is Exodus 20. And why is it topical? Well, because my state tried a few weeks ago to prominently display the 10 commandments in every public school classroom in Texas. However, I am going to brag for a moment that I gave my testimony to the State House, and a number of other people did as well, but I put as much publicity behind that as I could, and we beat that bill. So that did not pass. This shall not pass.
So. Yes, I want you with the Gandalf staff.
It's also very
and it's also very topical for me because this is the first sermon I got at school.
Okay. Isaac, what were you saying?
And I was saying that it's also very chronologically apt because yesterday and today outside of Israel is the festival of Shavuot, which is the celebration of the day that the Ten Commandments were given.
And also, this is a 1-year anniversary for Blasphemer's Bible.
Oh my God, is it
really? Is it?
Yes.
Is it really?
Yes. I mean, it's 2 days after, but yeah, essentially.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
happy anniversary, guys.
Yeah, happy anniversary, everyone. Due to Thomas' insistence, we did the Passover sacrifice around the time of Passover itself, and now we're doing the Ten Commandments around the time and they got the Ten Commandments. It took us the same amount of time to read this
Peter,
section as it took for the Hebrews to walk from Egypt to Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
40 years later, we finish Revelation.
We're reading the Bible in real time here, people.
And I've been meaning to ask you: have you seen the brand new bill that apparently slid in somewhere in February on Valentine's Day?
Which one are we talking about now?
We're talking about West Virginia Senate Bill 619. This bill,
I don't know that one. Is that
this bill is to amend and reenact Code 18546 of the Code of West Virginia of 1931, as amended, relating to allowing teachers in public schools that include one or more grades, kindergarten through grade 12, to teach intelligent design as a theory of how the universe and or humanity came to exist. We're back to Kitzmiller versus Dover.
Yeah, we already settled that one. What the hell?
Yeah.
Oh, they know because they're relentless.
This one was introduced on February 14th, 2023.
Yeah, just remember that faith means never having to admit that you're always wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Never admitting when you've been proven wrong. Just keep on relentlessly repeating the same lie even when you know it's a lie.
Mm-hmm. You know, there was a book written by a man who actually loved Christianity called Why Christianity Must Change or Die. And apparently they've gone with die because they are doubling down on the most infantile version of this religion, the most childishly literal minded. Like, this is what a 5-year-old would come up with reading the book. And that's what they have to take as the absolute truth, or God doesn't exist and they should just go murder everybody. Like, what?
So the funny thing is that they kind of tell you that that's how they're reading it too, because I forget what verse it is, but there's the verse about being like a child in the faith. What verse is it in the New Testament?
I tell you the truth, any of you who do not accept, who are not like this little child, or do not accept the kingdom as a little child, shall not enter therein. Yeah. No, they do. And it's infantilizing is something that high control groups and abusive relationships enact to keep you in a state of dependency. Whether it's a cult or an abuser, an individual abuser, that's the name of the game. So
simplicity at its best, they are just a bunch of bullies and they love bullying people.
That too.
That's all it really is.
Living in that much fear is exhausting.
Speaking of exhausting, I have a puppy that I'm trying to adopt. as you can see there.
I think your other dog may have already adopted him.
Yeah, it looks like it. We found this. This dog was found tied to a light pole at an intersection, abandoned.
Oh,
So no chip, no tags, none of that. And yeah, and I think we may have found a home for it. I got a report that somebody's going to pick it up next week, and so that'll be good. But
you might want to keep it, Arn. They get along.
You
didn't yesterday.
Yeah, but it always takes a little bit of time for dogs to get used and settle who's boss, and that's usually 1 or 2 days, and then it's settled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Peter has forced a lot of dogs to be in the same room with each other. You would know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, in you know, in the spirit of trying to keep us all alive for next week, why don't we start on the damn commandments and see how
there's a good
God
idea.
is not smarter than a fifth grader.
I will begin.
Will you?
You can do up to 14 because that's all the commandments.
If we could kind of keep our comments substantive and pithy but short, because I think a lot of people have a lot of commentary to add.
Yeah. Mine is a bit skeletal, so I tried.
To the point. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to open Exodus 20, verse 1. And God spoke all these words. Like all these words, like so many words, the best words.
The words that no one's ever spoken before.
Go on.
I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven or in the earth below, or beneath, or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to the 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments, or else, bitches. Sorry.
So beta.
A little bit of embellishment there. You cannot make an image in the form of anything in the heaven or earth or in the water. You can't make any recognizable artwork.
Aaron, I think you should read from 14 and then we'll commentate.
Oh, I'm loving this.
Fine. We'll do it your way. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name.
I'm buying a dildo and naming it the Lord.
Jesus Christ, what'd I just tell you? Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days shall they labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall do no work, neither you nor your son, nor your male or female slaves, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that in them is. But he rested on the 7th day forever. And that's why nobody's ever heard from him again. Therefore, the Lord blesseth the Sabbath day and make it holy. Honor your father and your mother. Forget all that shit that they did. I know. Just forgive them. They were drunk. So that you may live long in the land that the Lord thy God has given you. Don't murder people either, by the way. Just want to throw that one in there. And and stop committing adultery. And you shall not steal. That's an important one. And do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Answers in Genesis. Discovery Institute.
Ray Comfort.
Inmate number 0645-2017.
That's what I was about to say.
Go on.
You shall not covet thy neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor your male or female servant, nor his ox or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's ass, nor his wife's ass. None of that. And then we'll turn it over to Tomer for commentary.
Yeah.
I don't remember which version of the Bible I was reading. It's slightly different than the rest of y'all's, I think.
Yeah, but about the versions, it's a bit odd because there are certain versions that the numberings of the verses are different. For example, in the Hebrew Bible, verse 13 contains 13 to 16 in the Old Testament, which is convenient.
Okay.
Yeah, this happens throughout the Old Testament, where some verses are just not exactly lined up. But I mean, the verses are in the same order, but they're just numbered and separated differently.
Yeah. Yes. So,
as far as I know, the numbering system was made by the Christians first, and then the Jews kind of were like, okay, we're going to use the same system, but theologically, this is supposed to be one verse. It's not supposed to. They've put them into separate verses, but they're not supposed to be.
Well, they usually put them into separate chapters. The verses, for the most part, are the same, but the chapters division is a little bit different usually.
In this case, I have to say, I think the Christians probably got it right because they gave a verse to each commandment, regardless of length. So or well, okay, a couple verses to the rambling about the Sabbath day because there was a lot of sentences in there. But at least in the case of you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, like these are distinct commandments, and it's sensible. I have to say, the best written one, in my opinion, is still you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. And of course, literal-minded Christians like Ray Comfort will turn this into you shall not lie. That's not what it says.
No,
this is actually a subtle, nuanced commandment that talks about legality, about, the injustice of, perjuring yourself in order to do someone harm. That is not the same as saying, no, of course I'm not planning you a surprise birthday, Dad. Like, they will put those on the same. I have had Christians, we've all had Christians come to us, have you ever lied? And I was like,
no, it's not that way. It's, have you ever told a lie?
Have you ever told a lie? Well, and I'm like, I'll honestly go, not that I recall. And they'll be like, you think you've never lied? I said, no, I just don't remember a time when I've lied. Like, I told my mom we were going to split lunch and then I paid for it behind her back. Haha, I lied. Ooh, yeah, I totally deserve hell for that. No, what is wrong with you people?
It's very important to note that this is about, testifying against someone else. False accusations is the way that I would interpret that more than perjury.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It's important to note that the Bible does not prohibit lying. Remember, there's places in the Bible where God admits to lying and even brags about it. So it's not that you can't lie. And this is important because if religious people couldn't lie, we wouldn't have religion.
Also, the commandment you shouldn't swear falsely also implies that you're allowed to lie, but you're not allowed to swear a lie.
Yeah, because the oaths in the ancient world were like basically all they had. You can also see this in ancient Greece as well, where oath taking and like legal cases would often be determined by the oath taking alone. So like if if I'm telling this falsely, let the heavens rain down upon me or some shit like that. Like that was their swearing of the oath.
The Lord do so to me and more also if aught but death part you and me. The Lord do more to me and so and more also. You see a lot of that all throughout Scripture and obviously in ancient cultures because they actually believed they would be smited if they.
Yeah, right. I did a presentation on the 10 Commandments where I just ripped through on my interpretation of them, but I want to just give a quick summary here, where it says that you shall not make images in the form of anything that is above, in heaven above or on the earth or in the waters, So you don't want to do anything recognizable. You're not allowed to make renderings according to this. Mm-hmm. So by the way I would interpret this is only abstract art is by omission permissible. And then separately, you're not allowed to worship them.
If I'm not mistaken, the early church was actually very careful about that. So a lot of the earlier ones would have nondescript caricatures of people more than anything else. And that was only later on when they started to become more elaborate, when art started
I think if you look at like old medieval Jewish artwork, sometimes they would have people with animal heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, for example, the famous Haggadah that has the bird heads for the Jews.
Yeah.
So and if anybody's curious, that this line where it says that you honor your father and your mother, that you will live a long life. If we haven't covered all of this before, the reason that it's what does it have to do? Why would honoring your father and mother mean that you would live a? What's that?
I will comment on this.
Okay, so why? What's the what is the relationship between honoring your father and mother? How does that mean that you'll live a long life? You find out when we get to Deuteronomy, and it says that if you dishonor your parents, they can have you killed.
I think
that is also true.
It's important to read these in the context that the penalty in all cases is death, which can take a piece that might otherwise be decent advice, like showing respect to your parents, and turn it into something immoral and abusive.
I have a story about this. When I taught in Odessa, Texas, and the teacher I'm talking about was a dear friend, and they never look at themselves as indoctrinating other people's children. But it was 6th grade, and we taught all subjects. So whenever she taught social studies, and it was talking about culture, and we're supposed to talk about religion, she would use that as an opportunity, and she invited me to watch the presentations of the different religions. And she told me that whenever she gets to the Christian religion, she always tells the students it's the best of all the religions, because if you honor your mother and father, your days will be long on the earth. So some people look at teaching Christians as a ministry.
Yeah.
And so they've got other people's kids, captive audience, and they don't look at it that way. And then when they did the Buddhism, the funny thing, when I told the story before, I think we got to the Buddhism presentation, she asked me how to pronounce something, and I'm like, I'm not Chinese. I'm half Vietnamese. So like Asians don't know all the Asian languages, So she was a dear person and a dear friend, and they never look at themselves as causing harm. And they're trying to insert these 10 commandments, and they call them 10 commandments. And that's a question I had: are there really 10? Was this edited? I mean, we call them the 10 commandments, but aren't there more?
Which to that end, which part of the commandments is the "thou shalt not be gay" commandment in?
That would be in Leviticus. But yeah, that's not one of the commandments per se, but it is still part of the law. But we'll get there when we get there. There's a whole section on that. So
yeah, see, I count 14 commandments in Exodus 20.
Well, and that's a reasonable assessment if you're breaking it down. Although I still think it's hilarious that the Catholics cut out the commandment about not making images, because they rely so much on images in all of their artwork, and then cut the one about coveting in half to make coveting your neighbor's wife distinct from coveting your neighbor's property, and then which sort of seems redundant with the whole "don't commit adultery" thing.
Well,
yeah, and as others have mentioned, it also the thing about "do not covet" kind of goes against the entire basis of capitalism.
It does,
but well, here in Texas, when they wanted to put the 10 Commandments up, that was an edited version of the 10 Commandments. They wanted a politically a politically correct version of the Ten Commandments, wherein it didn't mention your slaves, for example?
No. So this is what happens. See, they watch History of the World Part 1, and when Moses dropped the 15th commandment set, that's why we're up to 10. So that's actually what happened. You see, that's why we have 10, not 15 commandments.
Yeah, that was a pretty funny bit.
Any way you look at that, can you imagine if you're a child and well, I mean, the part with the slaves, if you leave that in there, don't covet the slaves, and it wasn't talking, and Christians will do this. They'll go, well, biblical slavery wasn't the same as the Civil War slavery.
No.
Yeah, who cares? It was still slavery.
It's awful.
Yeah, and we will find out in the next chapter that yes, it was.
And they'll take the rules about Hebrew indentured servitude and pretend that those are the rules for all slaves, despite the fact that it explicitly says the opposite in very great detail.
Right.
Indentured servitude is a very convenient way for people to get away with having slavery and not make it sound as bad.
Right.
It's
well, yes,
freaking thing. It's just not quite.
Again, they had worse slavery, more like chattel slavery for people who were not Jews, because of course they weren't really people.
Yeah, the next chapter is only going to talk about
my
Israelite
point
slaves.
With the Ten Commandments was looking at this, understanding that the penalty in all cases is death. You have maybe 3 that would make decent laws under those systems: don't murder, don't steal, and don't perjure yourself to slander people. That's it. Like, adultery is bad, but killing people over it, not so great. So basically 3.5 out of 10. You cannot pass 5th grade with that mark.
The laws of Hammurabi cover these things in better detail.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
And they came first.
Among many other things too. I mean, we know not to kill. We know not to.
Even if you were to pretend that Moses really existed, and even if you were to take the earlier date that they usually give for him, which is like 1500 BC, Hammurabi still came earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we have originals of his laws because his laws were actually carved in real stones.
Also, yes, they were, actually.
Yeah, once we'll get to the chapters there, I have comparison between Hammurabi and other laws like the Hittite laws, the Shunan laws, Middle Assyrian laws, etc.
I am looking forward to that. I want to make some other comments since we're so many people like to tell the lie that the United States was based on the 10 Commandments, regardless what our founding fathers said. Let's compare, verse 3, the first commandment to the First Amendment, where the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. A lot of people understand that to mean, or pretend that means that Christians and only Christians have freedom of religion, that they're free to worship Jesus, and you're free to worship Jesus in any way you like. That's not what that means. I've heard people tell me that. Politicians have said that.
Yes.
That freedom of religion means you're free to worship Jesus.
Putting these in the classroom is alienating to non-Christian students. Like, as a teacher, and when I taught literature around Christmas time, Charles Dickens, and I had Jewish students, and they were like, well, we don't celebrate Christmas. And I wasn't doing it in a preachy way. I was doing it in a more secular way because Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol is about how Christmas should be a family time, a giving time. And before Charles Dickens, people weren't celebrating Christmas because they thought it was too pagan. So I was just looking at it from a cultural standpoint, but still, and in my experience, like with this teacher, they won't mean to, and people will say that they won't do it, but they will. If they have a 10 Commandments in their classrooms, they will preach it at other people's children.
Not only that, but you will have children who see this prominently displayed. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. How is that not? And these are state schools, so this is the government being represented. that is a direct contradiction. The First Amendment contradicts the First Commandment. You are allowed to worship other gods. That's not a crime, and you're not required to worship this God.
If I was forced to teach in a school like that, what I would do is I would just have a very conveniently placed poster right in front of it.
My father taught me, and I'm very glad he did, that there is no right to say yes unless you have a right to say no. Whether it's an internal compulsion or an external one. If you can't say no, then you're not really saying yes. It's freedom is only freedom if you can say either of those things.
Yeah, a lot of people tell me that we make the choice about whether we're going to go to hell based on whether we believe, right? So we have to believe whether it makes sense to us or not, whether we really think it's true or not. We have to profess that we believe and make ourselves believe because we're being threatened with hell, as if that makes any sense. And to your point, to your point, it reminds me of that scene out of Free Guy where the girl pulls the gun and puts it against the guy's head and says, "Oh no, the choice is totally yours."
What irritates me so much about these things is it's just threats after threats after threats after threats. You're literally terrifying someone. I mean, the word fear of God is something I hear all the time. It's just they're terrifying you to obey as opposed to trying to become the best person that you can be. And I think that's absolutely horrific because that breeds in people when they're young all these types of emotions that they're going to give off to their children and other people. And this is why we have people who are justifying doing horrific crimes all across the world. That's how it starts. You teach them this is an authority, and then they internalize that and then become a tyrant. I mean, there's other factors too, obviously, but this is how you can find the seeds of that sort of dissent. And there's nothing good about this. It's just and just anger and cruelty.
So you have a couple of laws in here. There are a couple of laws here that were already laws everywhere in the world, long before the time alleged for the Ten Commandments. And the remainder, most of them, are unenforceable violations of human rights.
Mm-hmm.
Thought crime. Yep. Double plus ungood. What
I mean by violations of human rights is if you were to impose these as laws, they would be violations of human rights, which is what religion's all about.
I have a big question. The Ten Commandments, as we see here, are given to the Israelites after they come out of Egypt. And even in the Ten Commandments itself, I am the God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Keep the Sabbath day. These are laws for the Israelites. Why do Christians see the Ten Commandments as something more than they are? Even within Judaism, the Ten Commandments aren't really seen as anything special. They're just like a sort of overview. God is saying not only are these divine commandments, you should worship me and no other, but also these basic things that everyone takes for granted, murder, whatever. These are all now together divine commandments from God.
Yeah, so I would say that it probably has to do with the fact that when, early in church history, we have a lot of imagery and language that kind of lends itself to a brotherhood, kind of a family of Christianity. But at that point, it wouldn't be Christianity; it would be just another sect of Judaism. So they would view them all as being part of that same group. They wouldn't really view themselves as distinct because they have been included in the faith now. So even though it's meant for the Israelites, with the way that early Christianity would have interpreted it, would be more of a spiritual kinship, and that's how that's what I would think. Right. They would look at it like that.
What I'm saying is like the 613 laws they threw out very quickly, but for some reason they saw the Ten Commandments as being different, even though it includes within it things that they don't.
That would be later. Celebrate a different day than the Sabbath, right? They celebrate Sunday instead of Saturday.
Yeah, so that has to do with later church history, anyways. So that has to do with a different calendar. It has to do with different interpret. For Sabbath, that's one of them.
So Sunday is the Sabbath.
The Christians are very. The Christians do regard
Christians. Go ahead.
The Christians do regard some of the other commandments. I mean, like they look to Leviticus, And they say, well, okay, so this one says that getting tattoos is a sin. Well, that doesn't apply to us because Jesus came to fulfill the law. Oh, this other thing in Leviticus that says that homosexuality is an abomination. Well, now that's God's unchanging law right there.
Yeah. They
But
really
this
just
other
pick
one
and choose.
about not eating shellfish, well, that doesn't apply to us because Jesus came to fulfill the law.
Right. Yeah. It really is picking and choosing. There is a historical reason for each one of these, but it does come down to picking and choosing depending on what you like and your sects. So yeah, that would be the later interpretation. But for the 10 Commandments, this one that we're reading today, we're not, obviously we're not going to cover all the 613 laws in one sitting, but for these specifically, it's important to remember that there are 3 versions. There is this one, there is another one in Exodus 34, and there's another one in Deuteronomy 5. And from a lot of material that I have covered, the most likely, the oldest one would probably be the one in Deuteronomy 5. There have been a few floating ideas. So Michael Coogan, for example, he wrote a book called The 10 Commandments, and in it he argues for a very early dating of this section. He would suggest that so he doesn't think it goes all the way back to Moses, but he's like, maybe 100 or so years after Moses. So really early dating. And the way that they have come about that early dating was comparing it with something that we will compare it to for context, is like Hittite treaties, like is it pronounced suzerain, but like vassal treaties. So essentially you have a master in this new vassal state, and you have a treaty, and a lot of the laws do kind of resemble those in nature. But that argument was used because of their similarities to say, okay, well, obviously, since this is so similar to these ancient Hittite laws, then these should be about that ancient. And the biggest issue that has come about is the problem of form. And this has been covered by both Van Setter's and in Van Setter's Life of Moses, and also in Hayes and Miller's Israelite and Judean History. They all cover the fact that the form is very different. The introduction is very different. So this, for example, in this version that we're reading, if we were to compare it to some old Hittite ones, there are a certain amount of themes that stand out. Like there's a scribal introduction, there's a historical prologue. For this, we can kind of call it a historical prologue with the preceding verses in chapter 19. There is the king's expectation of the vassal's faithfulness. There is a prohibition by the king forbidding any change in the contract, and a clause specifying capital punishment for breaking the treaty. And this is quoting from Hayes and Miller. The claims of Hittite parallels to Exodus 20 cannot be maintained even in form, since Exodus 20 is in every way quite different. It begins with a scribal introduction, but this does not identify Elohim, but rather identifies what follows as his declaration. The identification of Elohim as Yahweh is in the form of a self-identification lacking in the Hittite treaty, which constitutes the beginning of what might be termed a historical prologue. So essentially, that 2 of these 5 elements of Hittite treaties are not included in this one, and in fact, Van Setter's comes to essentially the same conclusion. Instead, both Van Setter's and Thomas Romer point out that these are much closer to Neo-Assyrian treaties. The best one that I would think, and it's important to realize that this is probably not the oldest version. The oldest version, like I said, the one in Deuteronomy. This seems like a much larger expansion on it. For example, even the first one, right? No other gods before me, kind of thing. It's clear from stuff that we'll read later, like the older texts, that, and I mean the chronologically older texts, that they did make graven images. They were worshiping multiple gods. These things were, at least by the biblical authors, viewed as problems. So that's why they were writing these condemnations. And it had to be big enough to where these biblical authors would have to write these condemnations and in fact say that all of Israel is at risk because you guys are doing this. It's not just a small population that's doing this. Most of Israel is. So things like no graven image and no God besides me, to me, and in fact, this is actually an argument that is done brilliantly in Romer's The Invention of God. His essential argument is that the Ark of the Covenant was a statue of Yahweh in the temple. And that is not a super popular view, but I think he argues for it very well. So a commandment like, you should have no other God besides me or before me, that's literally like, here's a statue of Yahweh, you shall have no other God in front of that statue or near that statue of Yahweh. So
that's a graven image, though.
It is, but that is why we also have the other condemnation as well. So these would not be initially viewed as one thing. So they would have had graven images, which enough people, including these guys, would have. I guess for some of the later biblical authors, or not later, sorry, later as in we will read them later. They view these things as a problem, and that's why they have to write a condemnation against it. So once we have, I think we would pretty much have this actual statue up until the Babylonian exile, and it gets destroyed.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, and then but this is at a point at which Deuteronomy would have probably already been written, and then you have these inclusions of these different ones after the return from exile about graven images. But you still maintain a memory. We see maintained memories in texts a lot. Like once we get to Psalm 82, it maintains or contains a cultural memory of multiple gods. So
absolutely,
yeah.
I think it's important to focus on the fact that, like, as we've discussed, the Jewish culture was originally polytheistic, and there were a group of extremists that wanted them to only worship one God, and there have been all of these political things going over it. As we get into the histories, we'll talk about that as well. But when they went to exile in Babylon, they retrofitted a lot of their history, taking some stories and things like that and putting it into this narrative of one God, one people. And it was a total rewrite. I've seen the argument that this particular version of the Ten Commandments was priestly source, meaning like Neo-Babylonian. And there was a focus on the retrofitting of the Jewish history, on bringing people together initially with the things that they could still practice in exile in Babylon. Because obviously you couldn't do the sacrifices in the temple. You couldn't do, all these, that Feast of Palms or anything like that. But you could do the Sabbath, the circumcision, and the dietary laws. So you see that there's a really long ramble about how important the Sabbath is here. I also maintain there's a break from the previous chapter 19, verse 19 to verse 18, just where we're going to read to next. And it actually reads much better if you just literally cut out everything in between and read those two into each other.
Yeah.
Because this talks about, initially up there, it talks about the voice of God is speaking to the people. And then it gets into the verses we're about to read next, where the people are terrified because, God is talking and they're scared. Fair enough.
Yeah. I wanted to support what y'all are saying, because look at the commandment, you won't have any gods before me. Mm-hmm. So monotheistic, polytheism. And they kind of just papered over that with the monotheism thing.
They did. Yeah.
There were a lot of different places across the world that were playing around with the concepts of monotheism anyway. The Aten, for example, in ancient, I was just thinking about how interesting it would have been if, for example, they didn't go back to their pantheon of gods after that event.
Yeah, the funny thing is, a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I mean like normal people, not like lay people, not scholars. A lot of people have talked about like, what if Akhenaten was the true Moses. Now I see something like that, and I'm like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
You have no idea what you're talking about. They are wholly different things.
They are.
So
Lawrence just did a video on Akhenaten,
which was fantastic, by the way. I recommend you guys
talking
watch
of
that.
the people.
He
Talking
tried
of the
to.
people, let's hear from the what's it called again? The chat, the messages.
You have to catch up on that because I'm running out of
bit.
Minute Rice.
I just wanted to point out real quick, Arn, that Akhenaten, just to put it in perspective, also tried to institute monotheism, but was opposed by the other priests.
Well, the thing is, he did it quite easily, like super handily. Like in a matter of a couple of years, he instituted monotheism. But the thing is, who you actually convince is different than who you force into these situations. So, like, he built the whole city for it, and he started taking funding from other temples, so they couldn't do their worshiping anymore. He would threaten people with exile and murder and stuff like that. He was a dictator. So of course he's gonna go fucking crazy. And so he did enforce these things, but then we have like just as soon as he dies and Tutankhamun's like, okay, sorry, my dad was so nuts. He like easily restored everything back. It went back.
Tutankhamun was very young and originally I think named
Tutankhaten.
Instead of Amun. The priests of Amun quickly restored their worship after the death of Akhenaten.
He was Tutankhaten originally, and then Tutankhamun was what he was later called when he went back to the religion, and everyone was really quick to do that, and they were happy to do it. There's a lot of controversy on whether or not he was influenced by the priests because he was raised by them a lot.
Probably a little bit,
to be able to actually go back to the pressure of trying to get the whole country back in order.
Makes me think of Josiah.
Yeah, maybe the Israelite elite probably learned from that story of how not to introduce monotheism.
Yeah, there you go.
Maybe he was. The thing is, it's actually funny because a lot of the time Akhenaten was like sometimes he would be included in annals and in proclamations, and he would just be said to be like this horrible king. But then other times they would just remove him from histories in general. Like they wouldn't. And when I say remove, I don't mean like the chiseled out kind of thing that they're so used to doing. I mean just did not include. Like they just pretended like he never existed at all. So that was very very split on the
this is giving me Josiah vibes so bad because you mentioned and I for our listeners I should mention Josiah the boy king was raised by the priests of the Temple of Yahweh. And Lawrence mentioned that the Deuteronomy version of the Ten Commandments is probably the oldest because Deuteronomy appears to be a book that was saved almost entirely intact and not heavily redacted and re-edited by the priests when they came back from the Babylonian exile. But it is almost certain that that book was found, aka written, by the priests who raised Josiah and deliberately raised him in isolation from his family to be this radical fundamentalist Yahwist that they wanted as a king to put them in power because ideological advantage. And then again, that puts them obviously ahead of all other religious sects with the ear of the king. So then they start eliminating more and more other religious sects, retrofitting their history. But this was the book of the law that was found, was almost certainly Deuteronomy. And it's one of the only ones that the priests managed to, at least it seemed to have managed to be able to preserve entirely intact from the temple when they were taken to exile in Babylon, which is why we say that that's almost certainly the oldest one, because that book was kept more or less whole and can be dated back to this earlier point in history with this big push. So you have the same thing with Tutankhamun, who would have been made by his father Tutankhaten, raised by priests to promote a religious view that they wanted, boy king, puppeted by religious leaders to do what they want. In Tutankhamun's case, he died quite young. In Josiah's case, he didn't die as young as Tutankhamun, but he did die after he started to become wicked and have his own thoughts because he was no longer 12.
I get confused by all these people that are raised by priests in this monastic situation, and yet they can't do kung fu, and they can't perform any of the Doctor Strange magic.
If only.
By the way, people in chat are asking for Lawrence's video, so I put a link to that video, and it's a really good one.
Very, very enjoyable.
Yeah, I urge everyone to go watch that. And subscribe to
All right, so let me get through these chat comments as quick as I can. Minute Rice offers $6.66 and says, "Reject God's commandments, embrace snake." Mojo has a question. Says, Jesus existed, right? Did Jesus have the full version of the Old Testament?
That's
a thought.
I think by the time of Jesus, it was already in a sense canonized, so they would have had he would have had an Old Testament. It may have been different in some places, but I think he certainly would have had the vast majority of it. Maybe there are a couple of books that he wouldn't have had. But the thing is, it's hard to know his canon, right? Because if the most we can say is like if something is quoted, that would have been part of Jesus's canon. But we can't say that like every book he quoted is exclusively altogether Jesus's canon and nothing else outside of it. So it's hard to know Jesus' canon, but it does seem like the vast majority of texts would have been in his canon.
The Pentateuch would have been canonized after the return from exile under the rule of Persia. So that would have more or less been the same by that point.
The next comment is Mojo again. Says, which dating does the Old Testament have? I mean, the different books.
That is a large question.
I'm going to say I'm going to say thorium lead.
There is a good video. There is a good video by Useful Charts that goes over the history of the writing of both books, both testaments, and he uses some good sources and stuff. So, and nice charts to visualize it. So, I'd recommend that video.
Yeah, it ranges anywhere between the 8th century and at least if we're talking about just the Old Testament, it ranges between the 8th century and the 2nd century.
Yeah, it's all over
each book individually.
Each one is different. Yeah.
Daniel is 2nd century. We can tell that the Deuteronomy was, under the reign of Josiah, but the other books in the Pentateuch, particularly Genesis and large parts of Exodus and Numbers, are just complete patchworks that, different segments of them we're not even sure when they were written. They have a better idea of when they were stitched together, but where the fabric came from and how it's dated, it's not known. People
and this, ladies and gentlemen,
ideas,
is a hint. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a hint as to why so many seminary students come out atheist.
Also true.
Yes, facts do not align with simplistic understandings.
So Mark Smith offers $5 and said, "I brought you into this world. I can take you out of it."
Good
I've
old
heard that before.
biblical family values.
Yep, make another one look just like you. And then Jason says, "I have a question based on Aaron's statement about Deuteronomy. How close or far apart were honor thy parents or die written?"
It wouldn't have been too far apart, like not more than a couple generations.
The dying part is, I believe, on a different version of the honor your parents that we won't necessarily in the chronological reading run to immediately, but was for when it was written, it seems to be pretty far back. After all, the stoning of a rebellious child or the burning of a rebellious daughter who played the whore is covered in great detail.
The next chapter, or the chapter after, it talks about specifically hitting your mother or father or cursing your mother and father. But the honor your father and mother here so that you may live in your land or whatever, it can be read as like this is a blessing. So if you hit them, or you might get killed, but if you honor them, you'll actually be blessed with long life. But you could also read it as Aaron said.
Mr. Crennan then says, "Yeah, I just saw a program going over the 10 Commandments as a post facto reformatting. and that there are no 10 commandments as such in the Hebrew tradition.
There is a continuation there.
And he says maybe it's more appropriate to say that the Tanakh has dozens of obligatory laws, not 10, and not commandments. Yes, the way that it's spelled out in a couple of chapters from now, it'll say that it brought down all the laws and all the edicts, but it never.
Actually,
there's clearly more than 10.
Sorry. Exodus 34:28 specifically says the 10 commandments or the 10 sayings or the 10 words. Dvarim, saying or words. I mean, JPS translates Dvarim here. In Exodus 20, it translates to words, and in the 34, it's commandments. So it's really. Yeah.
I think the Christian attachment to these 10 commandments is, in my opinion, largely based in this idea that God has to be the basis of morality. The terms absolute do not mean real things that they would mean to any other person in any other context when you're dealing with religious Christians.
One of the testimonies given in Texas at the State House while I was there, this idiot who, like, son of David Barton, who's like just a misinformation propagandist, actually testified shortly before me to the effect that these 10 commandments were the basis of all Western morality.
We can do better.
Yeah. I love Lawrence's laugh at that. He didn't expect that.
Where's the commandment, thou shalt not make another person a slave?
Yeah, well,
that moral.
Jesus could have or God could have taken out 2 of these narcissistic, I'm so important, you have to spend all your time, sucking me off, and just put in don't harm children, and women have the right to consent what is done to their bodies.
Yeah, when we get there, because the Bible has a whole lot of wrong in it, but it has to wait its turn. Yeah. Okay, so next comment. Let's see. Somebody said you could offer to print the 10 Commandments for free, but also place the Satanic Temple 7 tenets next to them, or are either not needed for public schools, in which I agree. They need good teachers first. Yes,
I would say that you could do that. I see male teachers get away with openly, if the students ask them if they're about their religion, saying they're agnostic or atheist. But a lot of women are under pressure to conform to Christianity, especially in more Christian states. So that you're putting your job at risk and your livelihood, and you're supporting your family if you put the satanic tenets in your classroom. Maybe they won't tell you that's the reason why they're hassling you, but I tried to avoid it, and I still got caught the attention of a Christian administrator for defending a Jehovah's Witness they didn't want to pledge to the flag. And
because they have that legal right.
I have a very simple solution for this. Just have a mythologies class, and we can have all of the different types of tenets, all the various different types of sayings from all religions, or at least a lot of them, across the walls. And
5 Buddhist precepts.
Right. And then when you're teaching it as a mythologies teacher, because it's a very important subject, I had that when I was in college, which great class, but cover all those things and then explain why these things are important to these religious cultures, and then look upon it from a scholarly point of view, not as a physical, actual thing, but more of a curious linguistic and literary sense as to why cultures are the way they are. That would be fine with me. I'm okay with that, but not in every single freaking classroom, like a math class. Like, why?
The purpose.
No, theoretically, that would work if you could make Christian teachers teach it that way as a part of religious culture, and there's different religious laws. But in practice, Christians greatly outnumber non-Christians, Jewish teachers, Hindu teachers, and they're going to do it their way.
That's right.
To answer your question, the reason why they wanted to put the Ten Commandments in every classroom, it had nothing to do with morality. That was the argument they gave. And then some of them said that they wanted to put it up there for cultural reasons, to show our cultural heritage, which was closer to the truth, but still not the truth. The real reason was control, and they want the children to be convinced that the United States, it's part of American exceptionalism. They want children to be convinced that America was founded by God.
It's a bully pulpit.
It's
what about all the
Christian nationalism?
I'm part Cherokee myself. Like I have part of that in my history, so I'm literally a contradiction at that point. So how is that one part of my culture if they're not going to show the other parts of the culture too? That's bullshit.
They're just dogs peeing on something.
It is.
ISP wins.
Yes.
I'm just thankful that over here in England we didn't have that.
No, you guys
we
had,
don't have. Yes, we have a lot of Christian nationalists, I think, in the Conservative Party here in the UK.
Yeah.
But thankfully, none of them have come up with that idea for our schools.
Yeah. Next comment. Yeah, well, of course, you've got a history of it, don't you? You have a king who decides, no, I want to get divorced. I want to be able to get divorces.
Yes.
And so this religion doesn't allow that, so I'm just going to change the religion, and now everybody under my rule has to change religion. Oh, and by the way, if you don't change your religion, I'll kill you.
Yes, exactly.
And if you don't change it back under his first daughter, then she'll kill you. And if you don't change back again under his second daughter, well, she'll really only kill you if you try and plot her assassination. But, fair.
So the next comment is from Trevor and Wright, who says Christians need to realize that the civilization of the old had already had knowledge of how to govern their society by creating laws long before the emergence of monotheism. Yeah, it's important to note that for the people who say that like Dennis Prager, who said if God didn't say that murder is wrong, then murder isn't wrong. But Moses murdered an Egyptian and had to bury the body. He knew. He had to cover up the evidence. He knew that was wrong, right?
Well,
they hadn't given the Ten Commandments yet.
You skipped
right?
Anton Gomez's comment.
Cain knew that he murdered his brother and had to lie about it. He knew it was wrong. So even their own mythology contradicts them. So then, did I read that one? Yes.
Did we miss a comment?
Then says,
Arn, you missed one just above Trevor and Wright from Anton Gomez.
Oh, Anton.
Oh, yes. Anton Gomez offers 88 Mexican pesos and says, how did Arn time the Bible study to match his recent commandment bills? I bet he's the one pushing those bills.
Yeah, sounds like Arn. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Convenient.
Arn is actually a sleeper agent for big crosses, whatever they're called.
Big crosses. All right, then McCrinnan says, at Lorence or at Tomer, did the Essene keep the same Orthodox scripture at that time?
Probably not. The things that we found from Qumran, which is commonly thought to be the scriptures of the Essene community, or at least, it's left over, from the Essene community. There are a lot of hymnal texts and a couple of books that are not included in any other ancient canon list. So it's hard to tell whether or not it's hard to even tell if the texts at Qumran were meant to be seen as scripture themselves. But if we are to take the position that the Qumran texts were the Essene canon, then there are almost certainly texts in from Qumran that do not share parallels in any other canon. So yeah, I would say
they have extra books is it Enoch and stuff. But
the thing is, Enoch would have been accepted by other
it wasn't canonical
Jewish traditions as well. But the
Apocrypha, whatever it's called.
Well,
not canon.
Little,
it was
it's something else.
Maybe.
But the thing is, a lot of people, because scripture itself, it's not the same as canon. So scripture just means like book that it's a book that someone views as divinely inspired or authoritative in some way, right? But then canon is the closed book of scriptures. So like if you have a whole lot of books that are scripture, but you're not like opposed to including other ones generally, or taking some out, then what kind of canon can you be said to have? There's a great book from Lee Martin McDonald called The Biblical Canon. I really do recommend it, and it's this great dive into the history of canon. And essentially, I mean, it developed naturally. So you would have like community over here or community over there, and you'd, maybe the one over here would accept a book and the one over here wouldn't accept that book. And it was this very natural progression until eventually you get to canonicity and you get to actual closed books of scripture. But that didn't happen until later. So when it comes to like the Essene, for example, from the scriptures that we have from them, if, like I said, if we are to assume that the ones at Qumran constitute their scriptures, then we can say that yes, they had some texts that are not known to be included in any other from any other Jewish community.
I have to say, it seems like scripture only becomes canon when a bunch of men in dresses get together and yell at each other, and then finalize the stamp and agree to shun and excommunicate anyone who doesn't agree with them.
That wasn't until much later we get anything like that. But it was a very organic process.
Wait, but the books that they have in common with the Masoretic, for example,
thousands of years they've had drag reading hour.
Yes, but that was only in the golden rooms with the special magic wafers.
We just call that sparkles and glitter today.
Yeah, well,
I'm sure it was fabulous.
Bedazzlement to the priests,
All right. The next comment is the Redneck Atheist says, honestly, there should only be one commandment. Thou shalt not cause harm to others. I like that one. And then Eric Wander, 2 months, member of 2 months, gifted 5 RNRA memberships. Thank you. And then Deviant Outcast says, the honor thine father and mother, yada, 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 surely has never been abused by abusive parents anywhere. Nothing abusive about anything in the Bible at all. Nope. No.
My fundamentalist stepmother, whenever she thought I was being saucy or rebellious, she would open a Bible and she would say, what does it say here? Honor thy mother and thy father. And I was like, it was a different part of the Bible. And I was like, what's the next verse say? Don't provoke your children to wrath.
Yeah. Two-way streets are remarkably uncomplicated. If parents want respect, they need to show respect to their children. And that's how it is.
And now we have a question from Deviant Outcast. Says, what origin / how come you use Calvary instead of Golgotha? I never heard Calvary until yesterday. Is it just the overtly zealous Anglophilic Anglification that shows, or what's up?
Lawrence?
Are we talking about like the term Calvary as in like horseback kind of thing? Is that what we're talking about?
They're talking about.
I'm just reading it as it's written, man.
Where Jesus was crucified on the hill of Calvary or Golgotha.
Hold on, say that one more time.
Where Jesus was crucified.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I was like, what?
That is
when
a name
we
for
talk
Golgotha.
about horses here? But yeah, I've also never heard the term Calvary used for that.
According to Wikipedia,
Wikipedia cites it as Calvary as well.
I've heard of
the Latin version of Golgotha, which is the Greek version of the site outside Jerusalem. Where
Golgotha
Jesus
would have been the
was
place. Yeah.
Now
I was so confused as to where Calvary came in. Yeah.
Now I've got a Christian hymn stuck in my head.
Yeah.
Mercy there was.
Look at those eyes.
Grace was.
Look at those eyes.
Look at your puppy.
Was multiplied to me on Calvary.
There was like
Calvary and Golgotha have both been used, but you are more likely to find, if you find a church named Calvary something or other, they're almost certainly like hyper evangelical. I mean, it's not guaranteed, but it's a very good indicator.
Everyone that I have seen has been like that around here anyway. So
and they always come riding in on their horses with that stupid horn.
Freaking high horses, gosh.
Oh, what do they have? God coming in on the magic horse, and he was like Keith Richards. He looked like
my
Keith
horse.
Richards.
My horse is amazing.
Apparently, it's got nothing to do with horse. It means skull.
Okay, are we done? Tomer, are you done?
Yeah, it's an hour and 5 minutes, and I haven't started my commentary yet.
Let's go.
We've had a lot to say about this today, Tomer. If you haven't figured that one out already.
Yeah, I did figure it out. That's why I was being silent, because I know that this chapter, there are so many things to say about from all of you, because you're in the US. Some of you were Christians. You were reading this a lot, and I assume so. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Go for it.
So, should I start, or there is another question by Trevor and Wright?
Oh, there is? Okay, let me knock this one out. Trevor and Wright says, is it true that Judaism is an Abrahamic religion related more to Islam and to a lesser extent Christianity? According to Rabbi Tovia Singer, this question is for Lorence.
Well, I guess it depends on who you want to believe. So the Muslims definitely believe that they have the original form of what would be the Abrahamic faith, essentially, and then they would believe that
by virtue of being the most corrupted.
The thing is, in their theology, in their I think it's in, I forget if it's in the Quran or in the Hadith, but they believe that they were given the original Bible, the one that isn't corrupted. So they think that they had access to that, and they haven't corrupted it since then, or at least the laws that were passed down, right? So they were like, okay, so Muhammad got the revelation of all this stuff, and it was and then he gave proclamations based on whatever order that was in. But the thing is, if we're talking about an original Abrahamic faith, that would have been polytheistic. None of them are close to it. If we're talking about which one is closer to, if we're taking Judaism, let's say, once it was already monotheistic, it is closer to, I mean, they're both kind of, no, I'd say it's still closer to,
I think historically,
would it be closer to ancient Christianity, or would it be closer to ancient Islam? Because they've changed since then, right? So it depends on what
there is a
snapshot you're
great deal
taking.
of Christian influence in the Middle East too, like the Yazidis and the Zoroastrians.
I think historically Islam is derived from an early form of Christianity.
It was, but it wasn't. But the thing is, it's not even an early form. It's just an earlier one, because early Christianity is if we're talking in the first few centuries.
It was influenced.
It
was influenced by Christianity. But one of the things about Islam is they're like, we're going to go back to the original, because of course God told the original in a recitation that we'll write down way later, that will totally remain uncorrupted because reasons. But I've noticed in religion, every time people want to go back to the original, that way madness lies. That never becomes a better version. That always becomes more extremist, more intolerant, more violent, more cruel, more primitive, more barbaric, more ignorant. Just, I remember hearing an opinion on Buddhism, actually, that certain Buddhists believed that, of course, Buddhism now is not like the original Buddhism, because the seed was alive and it grew and changed over time, and that was inherently a good thing. But that is totally antithetical to the mindset that I was raised as a Protestant Christian, who part of the evangelical tradition was trying to go back to original something or other, well, whatever parts appealed to them. But I've noticed throughout history of religion, it's never good. Going back to the original always becomes monstrous.
Yeah, the revivals, the famous revivals, are often terrible. But I would say with the Judaism and Islam, the ancient folklore is very related. That predates Christianity.
Theologically, they're more similar, because what they think of God is Christianity is very different from both Judaism and Islam. From an Orthodox Jewish perspective, you can go into a mosque but you shouldn't go into a church or pray in a church, or because they'll see Christianity as idol worship, but they will see Islam as being, more or less the worship.
God does not beget; it is not begotten. Yeah.
But historically, Islam definitely is. I wouldn't say it's an offshoot of Christianity, but it takes a lot of early Christian
ideas,
bits from early Christianity.
Islam is. I would say it's definitely an offshoot of Christianity, because they were like, hey, Jesus is still a prophet, right? They still consider Jesus a prophet. So
yeah,
but they're not. What's the word? Not Nazarene. What's the word for like mainstream Christianity?
Orthodox?
Like Nicene.
Oh, Nicene.
Not Nicene.
Oh, they're definitely not Nicene. They definitely don't follow the Christian creed.
So like Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses are also an offshoot of Christianity, but they're not the same religion.
I remember reading that there were a group of imams and rabbis that agreed with each other, which is amusing to me, that the Jews and Muslims worship the same God and that Christians worship a different one.
I kind of find it
because Christianity
funny.
worship the Trinity.
Yeah.
No, it depends. No, not necessarily.
Most,
I guess maybe from that perspective, they
historically that has not always been the case. But I will say, I think it's amusing that Islam did to Christianity what Christianity did to Judaism. Just came in all patronizing and tried to sweep them in while completely rewriting everything about their theology. Oh yeah, no, you were sort of right. It's okay. It was the elementary school level. We'll just sweep you in under us. It's fine.
Jesus wasn't God. He was just a good boy.
Exactly. A good boy. Exactly. It's incredibly condescending and disrespectful to the tradition. And that's what Christians do to Jews all the time. And that's why you can't tell if a group is fundamentalist Christian or Jewish, depending on their names in the States, because they will co-opt Jewish names and covenant terms and stuff for themselves with no connection to actual Judaism.
Anyway, guys. Look, I've got to go. My evening meal is ready.
All right. Thanks, Adam, for joining us.
It was lovely to see you.
Lovely to
I'll
see you.
probably be back next week. I'm not promising, but I'll probably see you all again next week.
Bring your lawyer's wig, because we're going to be discussing law.
Yes.
Let's get into this.
No, I see another question.
Oh no!
Yep, I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
All right, so Deviant Outcast.
Yes.
Says it's in some Bible translation, English. The GE John Gleason crew were all over it. In my Swedish Bible, in John, it says Golgotha is Hebrew for skull.
Yeah.
Is there a connection?
Greek,
Calvary, skull.
So skull is also is the one that I've heard before. But my guess is that these are just identifications that they would do. So like if they were to identify a place in a modern sense, they would sometimes just use the modern term. So depending on who was writing these translations, or who was writing the text, or who was copying it even, they would just use different terms for a place that they identified to be the same one. That's just my guess. But on this specific identification, I'm not sure. I'd have to check.
It sounds a bit like Execution Hill. I mean, that's sort of the logical inference to take, is this is where we go kill people, because we should at least keep that in one area, as opposed to just scattering executions far and wide. But
I don't think it's Hebrew. I mean, yes, the Hebrew word for a skull is
Gulgolet.
And I'm thinking of Karkafta, which might be Aramaic.
Karkefet.
Yeah, that's the Hebrew word. Okay,
no, it's Gulgolet is for skull. Karkefet is like the cranium, I think.
Okay, so Gulgolet is a Hebrew word.
Okay.
But I think it might be Greek. Golgotha, at least, would be the Greek version. And Calvary.
Greek. So we have a Greek version of a Hebrew word, and we have a Roman term and a Latinized version of a Roman term. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I feel so useless in this part of the conversation. The best I can do is say Kitab means book.
Well, we are 1 hour and quarter past this.
All right.
I still haven't started.
I'm going to mute myself.
Yes.
Pumped for this.
Finally, let us begin. Verse 2. I am the Lord your God, or in Hebrew, Anochi Adonai Elohecha. Avishur writes here, it was common for celebratory declarations in ancient Near Eastern texts to begin with first-person self-presentation. We see this in inscriptions of northwestern Semitic kings. For example, the Mesha stele, written in Moabi, dated around 840 BCE, starts with Anochi Mesha ben Kamoshi. I am Mesha, king, son of Chemosh. And the Kilamua stela, written in Phoenician, 9th century BCE, opens with Anochi Kalmo. I am Kilamua.
Yeah, all those languages are Canaanite, so very, very similar.
Yeah. And verse 5, a jealous God, in Hebrew, El Kana. Sfono comments that there is no comparison between God and any other phenomenon in the universe. Therefore, God is entitled to stand on his dignity by refusing to be compared. Gersonides writes that God is like a king who is jealous when his kingdom is given to another. Targum Pseudo-Jonathan and Sa'ad Gaon translate jealous God to a punishing God. According to Sauna, the Hebrew root kuf nun aleph, in its primitive meaning, seemed to have meant to become intensely red, and so the term could express ardor, zeal, rage, and jealousy. Verse 7, misuse the name of the Lord. KJV reads, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, and JPS, you shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God. The Hebrew word that is translated to either misuse, vain, or falsely is shav. Early translations and commentators have varied opinions about the exact meaning, either it misuse, vain, falsely. An opinion is expressed in the Talmud Berachot 33a that anyone who recites an unnecessary blessing violates this commandment.
It sounds a lot like what Lorence was mentioning earlier about swearing oaths by gods, and to invoke their punishment if you lied. And,
So when somebody sneezes and you say, God bless you, you are violating one of the commandments?
No, I think this was more like a serious legal oath.
Yeah, it was a serious legal oath, yeah.
But I do think it's funny that people will now use it to criticize someone who drops a hammer on their toe and says, God damn it. When in fact it was actually closer to the perjury commandment in original intention with, not swearing falsely by God, because then you're perjuring yourself and bringing him into it too, which apparently he dislikes. Fair enough.
It's a funny thing about our cultural conditioning. I mean, so often I hear even atheists, when they want to exclaim something impressive, they say, "Oh my God!" And I managed to train myself out of saying that. Right? I'll commonly say something like, "Oh my word," and when people sneeze,
you sometimes say, "Oh my gosh."
I say that.
Do. Yes, you do.
That's embarrassing.
I say, "Oh my gosh," yeah.
That's
don't worry,
embarrassing.
people do.
And gosh,
I say Jesus Christ all the time.
Say gosh.
I say golly gee willikers.
In all fairness,
the whitest person here, Mighty Chicken.
Arn, you can't say "oh my gosh" because gosh, as we all know, is the god of heck.
Yeah. Oh no, I have said that. I do remember now. That was a joke. I said, "Gosh darn it to heck." But I've done that to be tongue in cheek. But the thing that frustrates me is that I still haven't trained myself. If I drop something on my toe or something, stub my toe on the table, whatever, I when I get frustrated, I still say, "God damn it." And it irritates me because that didn't make sense. It didn't make sense for me to say that when I was a believer.
Yeah, I was reprimanded for saying "God damn it" because that was blasphemy. So now, if you say it, it's kind of fun because it's blasphemy.
Yeah, exactly.
I say it because it's so much fun when I hear Arthur say it.
Yeah.
I have to say, during one of my more rebellious later Christian phases, people didn't want me to swear, and I pointed out that the only commandment against swearing was taking the name of the Lord in vain. So I offered to replace every single swear phrase that included any form of religious with just fuck. Fuck, damn it. That kind of thing.
I say shit fuck.
There you go.
That's what I do. Shit fuck. That's what usually I go
for.
I have a
Sorry.
question for you guys.
Sure.
This is an honest question. I'm just always wondering, how is it that believers are not able to recognize the incredibly weak ego of their God in this. When you read all these things, it's just the ego is so weak that he has to have all these gratifications about himself, only himself, and no one else before him, etc. It's baffling me that they cannot identify the shallow and very, very, very damaged ego of this.
Which relates to the next comment. Juju Dude offers £5 and said, "Do you think Trump is related to Henry VIII?" Yeah, I don't think Trump is related to Henry VIII, but he is a perfect example of what Mighty Chicken is talking about right now. Why is God like this? Because the God character is based on the ultimate narcissist. I alone can save you. Nobody knows more about this than I do. It's the ultimate. He's super jealous. He will turn on you in an instant. Great guy, love him, but the moment you turn, not so great. Don't love him so much.
They're always looking for a strong man, and they think they see that in Trump. They think they see that in old school kings like David and Solomon, and some people want to be ruled.
We were trained to think that, though, about God, weren't we? Like, I think I was, to say that, God deserves praise and it's right for him to demand it because it's his right and nature. Yeah. But Jeff, in response to your question, I would say it's because they believe themselves to be under the power of this God, they convince themselves of what it is necessary to believe in order to be safe under those circumstances.
It's a very authoritarian mindset that you don't think for yourself. This king knows everything, and if you don't obey him, he's going to punish you. It's very childish.
People who have had abusive parents or abusive spouses. People who've had abusive parents,
not over each other.
Spouses. Sorry, abuse victims will often, their minds will avoid seeing certain things to keep them safe. Mm-hmm. And that's a necessary survival strategy. And that's what it feels like.
Eric Wander posts a comment, says, Deuteronomy 11:1, love the Lord your God and keep his requirements, his decrees, his laws, and his commandments always, always. The word of God means nothing to Christians.
Oh, that's okay. To answer Jude's question about Trump related to Henry VIII, he is not, but his wife is a direct descendant of Henry VIII.
No way.
Hey, my direct
Maria Maples is a 15th great granddaughter of Henry VIII.
No kidding.
Through Mary Boleyn.
Marla Maples.
Mary Boleyn, Catherine Carey, Letters Nolles. Yep.
Are you talking about Marla Maples?
Yeah. I know, it says here Maria Maples.
My direct descendant is the gentleman of the stool for King Henry VIII.
The groom of the stool.
If you know who that is.
I know who that is.
I think Lilith knows who I'm talking about. He's his royal tender on his tender bits.
The broom of the groom. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
There.
Yeah, I have another comment and then I'll.
All right. Mark Caesar offers $2 Australian and say cheese and rice rather than Jesus Christ.
Okay. Verse 8, the Sabbath. Sauna comment. The Sabbath is wholly an Israelite innovation. There is nothing analogous to it in the entire ancient Near Eastern world. This is surprising since 7-day units of time are well known throughout the region. Yet the Sabbath is the sole exception to the otherwise universal practice of basing all the major units of time, months and seasons as well as years, on the phases of the moon and solar cycle. The Sabbath, in other words, is completely disassociated from the movement of celestial bodies. This singularity, together with creation as the basis for the institution, expresses the quintessential idea of Israel's monotheism. God is outside of and sovereign over nature.
We didn't get into that. The 7-day creation is also kind of sanctified in the 10 Commandments, and that's why young earth creationism is so hard to stamp out with science.
There is an ancient, almost like astrology thing where each day of the week is connected to a planet or a god, or the god that represents that planet. And we have that still in like English with like Sunday, Monday, and then the other ones are based on like Norse versions of
Thursday.
And in French you have mercredi, vendi. So there is this idea that each of the 7 planets or wandering stars were related to a day of the week. So I wonder if Yahweh was identified with Saturn as like king of the gods or whatever, and by promoting him as the only god, they promoted Saturday as the only holy day or something like that. It's an idea.
I was kind of grateful, I guess, for the Sabbath day, even though it was on a different day, because then you got a day off of work back in the old days, and maybe slaves got that day off. But as a Christian Catholic or a Christian fundamentalist Southern Baptist, we were at church twice on Sundays with fundamentalists, so you didn't really get a break, and you also did mass on Christian Sundays.
There's a lot of stories of Jewish immigrants to America. When they first came to America, there was either it was a 7-day work week or a 6-day work week, where Sunday was the day off, and you couldn't, if you tried to get a job as a Jewish person, you had to say that you would work on Saturday, and if you didn't, you would lose your job. And so it was a thing that religious Jews would start a job on Sunday or Monday, and then they wouldn't come on Saturday, and they would have to find a new job the next week.
That's terrible.
Well, that's them.
Okay.
They want to follow it. So, but yeah, it's
okay. Verse 12, so that you may live long. Some commentators like Casuto and Chacham interpret the reward as a lex talionis, or exact retaliation, an eye for an eye. If you honor those who are the source of your life, you will also get to live long. Sana comments that respect for parents is deemed to be vital for the preservation of the social fabric, and so dishonoring parents imperils the well-being of society. Svono, however, writes that this reward is also applied to the first 5 commandments, as they are about respecting God, and God is also the father of the Israelites.
That was very much ingrained, that God was over the house, and the father was the extension of God.
Right.
Yeah,
so
the umbrellas.
Yeah, the umbrella. But did they ever talk about, like, what while you're growing up? If they mentioned, we have to, honor thy father, and thy father is God, like that kind of thing? If they ever did that, did they ever talk about the mother part of that?
Honor your mother.
Did they ever have in?
Yes.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm sure they talked about honoring your mother, but they didn't have an extension of
the
that.
mother. The mother was the helpmeet of the father, who was the representative of God.
Okay, gotcha. So they only extended the father and not the mother.
She was the illustration with the umbrellas, and you have God, and then you might have the pastor, but then you have the father, and then the mother, and then the children. So she has authority over the children, and that's it. Sure. She's next to bottom on the totem pole.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation, an interesting way of coping. But there's also, we'll get to it eventually once we get to Asher and stuff. But yeah, Yahweh had a wife, so just to put a pin in that one.
Okay, verse 13. So verse 13 in the Hebrew Bible is, as I said previously, in Old Testament there are 13 to 16 combined. So I'm going to relate from this point on. I'm going to number for the Old Testament because Americans. 13, murder. The stem resh tzadik chet, to murder, is understood by rabbinical tradition as referring to illegal killing. The reason for this prohibition is given by Genesis 9:6. Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed, for in his image did God make man. Ibn Ezra, however, adds that this also refers to murder by tongue. For example, giving false testimony, which results in having someone executed, or not revealing a secret to someone who would be saved if he knew it.
Okay, so keeping something silent that would save another person's life. I can see that. I have heard, and I can't recall the source for this, so I'm asking. I have heard that there were debates about at certain times in Jewish history that this referred only to the murder of fellow Jews, and that you could be considered guiltless even if you threw a rock into a crowd of mostly Gentiles and you accidentally hit and killed a Jew because you were intending to kill a Gentile and not, you know, it was just an accident that it happened to kill another Jew. I wish I could remember where I had heard this.
From a legalism perspective of like when is the death penalty applied? Maybe,
mm-hmm.
But
Maybe.
it still would have been considered like wrong. But they
maybe
do
less
really get into
wrong if you killed a
legalism.
Gentile.
The way this was just
Legalism as well.
described, the way this was just described, you know, where you neither kill nor or you know, neither cause testimony that the person would be killed or withhold testimony that would have saved their life. It sounds an awful lot like Asimov's robot rule that may not injure a human being nor through inaction allow a human being to come to harm.
Yeah, it does actually, very much.
Proof that we are a simulation.
I wanted to comment on this, that there's the legal killing, like Tamara is saying, but if God commands killing, like kill an adulteress, then kill this person. So, but and I used to be pro death penalty as a deterrent when I was a Christian, but whenever you give a government or a ruling authority to the ability to kill, then people start getting killed for thought crimes like heresy, etc. So not actually for doing something like that people want to deter, like raping and murdering an innocent person. And they also kill innocent people as well. But
we will get into a bit more like about the legalities of like the courts and stuff in the next chapter, I think, or the one after.
Now 14, commit adultery. It's a short one. The term for adultery, the stem nun aleph pei, is referred to mutual consent between a married woman and a man who is not her legal husband.
Yeah, it only works one way because technically at this point having more than one wife is allowed, so it's not adultery for a married man to
it's apparent that's obvious, isn't it? It's only between a married woman and a man who is not her husband. So if it's a married man, well, then she just becomes another wife, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Why would
if you go through it, yeah.
If she's unmarried, then she's just 21. Transferred property to him.
Why would she care about this to have?
And we'll get into the other bits where if she is a not married but engaged, or whatever the word is that they use, then it's different.
If she's engaged, she's already the property of another man.
This is applied very legalistically still, this commandment. Yeah. People who are raped can often be beaten and lashed for adultery if it was a married man, by some interpretations. In some countries.
Actually happens. Women who have traveled to Muslim countries where there is a similar law in place have been charged with the crime of it's not adultery, it's what's it called? Premarital sex, fornication, because they reported that they had been raped.
Okay.
Got a couple more comments I'm going to catch up on. Trevorn Wright says, also, I watched a study, I think that's LQ. IQ? Is that it? No, it looks like lowercase. So at LQ on Abrahamic religion is that some social scientists have argued that some use of religious texts to gain power and influence and other extremist goals or views. Yeah. I mean, that seems to be why the whole thing was invented. Deviant Outcast says, Isaac Raskin, but Mary Boleyn wasn't related to Henry VIII, or Henry VII, it was written here. Mary Tudor, I know. Mary Tudor, though she had never had children. There's no substance to Mary B's having kids with Henry VIII. They were born too late.
Okay, yeah, so it's not, it doesn't say his wife. Mary Boleyn it says his partner. So I think there is they're not sure if he had kids, if Catherine Carey was actually his daughter or not. Yeah,
he did have several mistresses.
Yeah, that's right.
See
so
another
direct descendant.
And then,
if you say that Catherine was his daughter.
What are we talking about? Henry VIII.
All right, and then Eric Wander says, for everyone, How many of the 10 Commandments does God directly break? He kills, he sends people to loot and steal, he lies. Any other? Well, God doesn't worship any other gods except in a later area where somebody is trying to cast a necromancy spell to raise an army of the undead. I forget where in the Bible this is, but they have to pray not Jehovah. They have to pray to the four winds, which is interesting because that was a Greek god, and also Subbatized god out of Conan.
Vision in Ezekiel, if memory serves.
Yeah,
the dry bones, maybe. No, I don't know.
Yeah, the Valley of Dry Bones. Yeah, but that's entirely metaphorical.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Not literally true.
Yeah.
Okay. Where Solomon consults a witch too, right? Later.
Well, no,
it's not Solomon. It's Saul.
Saul did. There you are.
Yeah.
We can go down a list here. He definitely murdered. He has committed adultery. He doesn't honor his father and mother because no other gods before him. He stole from people. You, of course, cannot have false testimony. Well, he was the great deceiver.
It's also important to remember this is not a legal context if we're taking it out like that. So then, like in that sense, he wouldn't have broken these because it's not.
Well, anything he does is good, and good is whatever he does or whatever.
I see what you're saying with that, but it's like all these things could definitely be, marked upon him breaking his own rules every single time. I mean, you can make an argument for every single one of those.
Because God uses the Nixon excuse.
Yeah.
And for those who didn't immediately get that joke, Nixon said, when the president does it, it's not illegal.
Yeah.
Which Trump did the same thing.
Oh, he's such a hack. It's not even funny anymore.
So a comment from Public Utility. Does indoctrination into superstitious death cults require brain damage or cause brain damage or both?
Yes.
Cause.
That's a medical question.
Yeah. Minute Rice offers $5 and says, is $5 enough to convince Aaron to go get a snake?
We don't need $5. We love snakes.
No, I think
just
bring one. Bring one
out.
Okay.
Bring out a danger noodle.
Continue, Tomer.
Yeah, thank you. 15, steal. The Hebrew word that is translated to steal. You want to say something else?
I thought 15 was after.
No, I said this. Yeah. They used the Old Testament.
Yeah, I got confused.
Yeah, it's confusing. Yeah. Hebrew word that is translated to steal, tignov, from the stem gimel nun bet. According to rabbinical tradition, this refers to kidnapping a person. And according to Sana, many modern scholars agree with this, since otherwise there would be an overlapping with the last commandment. Ibn Ezra, however, writes that this refers to taking money secretly and for deception. And now 16. Lilith and Lilandra are going to hate this. The Book of Education reads, and this commandment is thou shalt not bear false witness, is practiced on every place and at all times by males, but not by females, as women are not included in the category of testimony, since testimony requires focus and much concentration.
What?
I feel very
only men can be witnesses because they don't get distracted by snakes.
Danger noodles. Yes, that absolutely makes total sense, and we don't have an extraordinary memory between us of incredible detail, and whatever.
That's why it takes more female witnesses than male witnesses.
No. Okay.
Where was this again?
That's the Book of Education. That is a book that details all the commandments.
But yet, in the New Testament, the fact that three women saw Jesus first is used as like this must be true, because why would they use women as the witnesses?
Yeah.
When you understand it's Greek authors, and also it's the only way to make the story make sense from it's the only people you could give that job to. It's not that mysterious.
Yeah, but it could have been added as like let's use women, because if you use women, it makes the story makes the story more believable. Because if we had used men, that's what you would expect us to do. So we used women, and then you can say, see. It actually happened.
It's a false modesty excuse over again.
If we were making up from scratch, you would have used men. But
it's the same trope, kind of a related trope to God often uses the uneducated, like Peter,
exactly,
as his prophets and messengers.
Yeah, it's one of the most stupid arguments. Like, oh, it must be true because they used women.
Elandro, you shouldn't believe my prophets. Don't do that. Oh, sorry
for that.
Okay, against your neighbor here. Neighbor is translated from re'acha, which could also mean friend, companion, fellow, according to BTB Dictionary. Targum Onkelos translates the word to friend. Chacham interprets re'echa here to mean he that has an equal side to you.
I read somewhere that when it says love your neighbor as yourself, that it's actually that the translation is love your fellow Jew as yourself. When we get to that, when you do your commentary, Tomer, hopefully that you'll have that present in mind.
Yeah,
it's the same word. It's the same word.
Re'echa.
Re'echa. It's the same word.
Yeah.
It means neighbor, friend, fellow. Yeah.
Yeah. And 17, kavet, Hebrew tachamod. According to Avishu, the stem chet mem daled means here to try to get the thing which is desired. It appears in Exodus 34:24 and in a Phoenician inscription, the Karatepe bilingual, KAI 26, with the same meaning. While this stem usually has a negative connotation in the Bible, like in Micah 2:2 and Proverbs 6:25, it can also have a positive one. For example, Psalms 68:17 reads, "The mountain God desired Hamad as his dwelling."
God wants to live in a mountain.
Yeah.
And the mountain.
Yeah, that's for my commentary for this part. There is also another part.
Yeah. There was one thing that I didn't say. I thought was interesting was the bit about false witness. The bit about not taking God's name in vain. So Christians a lot of times think of that as like do not swear, like do not use swear words. And it seems that like the Jewish tradition anyway was more like do not swear that something that isn't true is true, or do not swear that there's even, I think I even saw a quote where it says, do not swear that something exists that is impossible to exist.
Swearing.
Swearing. God.
If you tell your friend, you can tell your friend I went to the zoo and saw an elephant with wings, but if you swear it, then you are transgressing this.
Swearing by God is a no to Christians too. So that's using the God's name in vain, like by swearing that something you're saying is true by God,
But in those days,
if it's true,
swear by God, or because remember when Jesus had that rant at the Pharisees in Matthew when he's like, you say that if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing, but if they swear by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. He says, and he who swears by the temple swears by it, and the one who dwells in it, and he who swears by the earth swears with the footstool of God, and by heaven, for it is the city of the great king. And simply let your yes be yes and your no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. So actually, I think I'm mixing up a few versions there, but that basically that's the Christian thing. It was sort of taking that next level, but it's pretty clear that people did make oaths. I swear to God, swear to Jehovah, whatever, that the X, Y, Z is true, or that I will perform this duty, or that I will, much as you would.
God.
It's perfectly allowed. You shouldn't take his name in vain. You shouldn't swear for something that you don't need. So there's three categories I saw was saying something that is not true. So you shouldn't swear that this wooden pillar is made of gold when it is made of wood.
When Jake Blues said there was an earthquake, a terrible flood, it wasn't my fault, I swear to God, he was sinning.
If he was lying, then it's taking God's name in vain. And then the second one is saying something exists that is impossible to exist.
God,
swearing on that is not allowed. And the third one is swearing on something that you don't need to swear. So saying that this thing that everyone can see is wood, I swear it's made of wood, is also swearing in vain.
I think
Rashi says
so
it.
You can't.
Okay. Right, but
you
swearing.
Can't say it's wood if it's not wood.
That's cool.
You don't have to swear
your ass. Basically, God's saying, "Don't talk out your ass."
That's what swearing in vain means. You're allowed to swear with use God's name on an oath for an important good reason. There's a separate thing where Jews don't say God's name in vain, as in they'll instead of saying God, they'll say the name, Hashem, the name. And like when they read a blessing, they'll say God's name. But if they're reading the blessing as like, this is the blessing that we're talking about, they won't pronounce the name. Instead of saying Adonai, they'll say Hashem.
And I've seen them write G-D instead of God.
G-D, exactly. Yeah. And
I see that.
Respecting the name is like a separate thing, but I guess it comes from here as well. Like any piece of paper that has God's name on it, they won't put it in the trash. They'll
Geniza in a Geniza.
Which is really good for archaeology.
Yeah, the Cairo Geniza actually is a very important source for ancient writings.
There you go. Well, that's I'm glad that it was a source for archaeology. But yeah, there seems to be this tradition of making things, making a boundary around so you don't accidentally, and then you end up with all these rules governing every aspect of your day-to-day life so that you don't accidentally transgress something that transgresses something that touches something that would almost be interpreted as something that could have violated that commandment. And it's
like fake it till you make it, practice makes perfect, all of that sort of stuff. If you train yourself to behave in a certain way, then you won't accidentally do something that would actually be a transgression. So don't ride a horse on Saturday because you might break a branch off to hit the horse.
All right, I'm going to read some more comments. Eric Wander says, so the people from the nations around you, those who shall not treat as your neighbors, right?
I think they were supposed to go in and kill them all, right?
It depends on who you're talking about.
And they're not your neighbors anymore.
It does make sense to have laws in place to promote whatever the word is.
Nationalism. The word is unity.
Brotherly, tribalism, all that sort of stuff.
No.
Yeah. Eric Wander adds, gifted 5 RN Raw memberships. Thank you very much. Then Trevorn Wright says, don't you think that the Bible is the most sexist literature that was ever invented? Because I don't think women were ever equal to men in the Bible, according to what I've read in it. Read the Quran.
But yeah, definitely I wouldn't say the most sexist. Yeah, the Quran, also there are extra biblical books that are somehow far more sexist than the Bible. Wisdom of Ben Sira, for example, is incredibly sexist. In fact, the universe cries whenever a woman is born. Let's see.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Martin Luther's words by himself. Martin Luther was so extremely sexist. He had no value in women existing but for to procreate other believers. That was their job. That was their sole purpose for existing, because he couldn't stand to look upon them.
Yeah, basically, I said last week, there are 3 things that are bad for religion: war, fire, or that are bad for books: war, fire, and religion. I would say the same thing is true of women. Women are books. And all those things are bad for us.
I was raised that I was subordinate. I was raised that I was subordinate to men.
Absolutely. My grandmother started praying for my future husband from the time I was 5 years old.
Okay, I think. Sorry, you can finish this chapter, Aaron.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I was on 18.
Yeah.
When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke because they worshipped a fucking volcano, they trembled in fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. And the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites this, you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make for yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold. Make an altar of earth for me, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and goats and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up my altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed.
Yeah, I will get to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently, miniskirts were a thing.
Yeah, and then there were. It was like kilts with no underwear, right?
Evidently, yeah.
Scott.
It was one of those parties where people show up wearing nothing but a tablecloth. I've been to those.
Like Marilyn Monroe going over that grate and her skirt blows up. Like yeah.
So before we actually hop into the commentary here, it's important to realize that this is actually originally part of the theophany from back in chapter 19.
Yes.
So we're kind of the whole section we got before was, for the moment, we have to pretend like it doesn't exist and act like this is a continuation of what was it?
Verse 19.
1919.
Yeah, it seems that this was inserted, and it would read, Mount Sinai was covered in smoke because the Lord descended in fire, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, and Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. And when the people, and then jump straight to verse 18:20, when the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled in fear and said, okay, you go talk to God, we'll believe you, whatever you say, just leave us out of this.
Yeah, so this
is to be a religious scammer back in the days when you've got a volcano conveniently going off behind you.
We've been over this, Arn. Not
there is a Jewish tradition that the Ten Commandments wasn't said between those two verses, because what happened was God started saying it, the people couldn't handle it, and then they said, speak for us. So he only said like the first or second one in one. Well, he said the whole thing in one breath, whatever.
I think that version is a different version of the same story that occurs later. But yeah, I've totally heard that one too, where he gives the first commandment and they're all like, no, you go talk to him. We're not.
Yeah, because
it's like it expounds the entire thing, but it is supposed to happen like really quickly, because either God didn't actually say the whole thing, or he said the whole thing like in one breath, and they couldn't handle it.
Yeah, probably one of the closer parallels to this theophany is one from the god Sin. So this was a Babylonian one, and there is a quotation from Nabonidus, who, by the way, so he was the last Babylonian king, and he's also commonly held to be the first archaeologist, because he actually did excavations back in the day. So
Nabonidus, I thought he was the one that kicked the guy into the pit saying, "This is Sparta."
Close, different guy. But yeah, so the quotation here, the petition of the first prayer, quote, "Establish from heaven the fear of sin," has its counterpart in the divine statement in 2022. "You saw that from heaven I spoke with you." So this is not necessarily a statement about where Moses is receiving these commandments, but rather where he's receiving them from. And there's a whole argument that Van Setters goes into this, and how the theophany is ever so slightly different from other ones, but its closest parallel is the Babylonian one. So yeah, that was something I want to point out, that we have to keep in mind. This is back to the theophany.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Verse 18, when the people saw, Rashi, based on Mechilta Rabbi Ishmael, writes, "This statement teaches us that there was not a blind person amongst them. And whence may we learn that there was not a dumb person amongst them? Because it states in Exodus 19:8, and all the people answered. And whence may we learn that there was not a deaf person amongst them? Because it states in 24:7, we will do and we will hear."
That's a stretch.
That's a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
Or it could just be like modern software development, where people just don't think about accessibility because it doesn't affect them.
Yeah.
I mean, technically, I agreed to the agreement because I clicked agree, but I don't even know what the agreement was.
Yeah, well.
What did you say?
Yeah, sure. I clicked that I read it, but everybody clicks that.
Legally, you can't agree because you've already sold your soul.
No, I don't have a point. I don't have a way to say no, do I?
Not and still use the technology, which has become more and more necessary for life. But yeah, it's childishly literal minded comes to mind again. Why do we keep running into this? Like, and all the people said we will hear. And since it's written here and the scripture must be literally 100% true in every conceivable way, that means nobody was deaf.
It makes sense.
And everyone was in perfect chorus.
Yeah. Clearly.
No, I'm sure they harmonized.
I can imagine it now.
Verse 20
is very good for the throat.
Yeah. Verse 20, God has come to test you. The Hebrew word for test is nasot. Most early translations and Ibn Ezra translate to test. Vulgate, Rashbam, and KJV render to prove. Rashi read nesot to mean exalting and greatness, like lift up an ensign in Hebrew nes, as seen in Isaiah 62:10, and I will lift up my standard nisi in Isaiah 30:17. And so the phrase here means to exalt you in the world. Sfono comments that the phrase means to become used to prophetic insights.
So, yeah. I mean, getting used to prophetic insights sounds an awful lot like prepping people to believe whatever Moses said. Although he doesn't appear to have told the people that God said he should marry all their wives. So, silver lining?
Verse 22, I spoke to you from the very heavens. So again, Rashi comments, but another verse states in Exodus 19:20, and the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai, and thus the two verses appear to be contradictory. There now comes a third verse and harmonizes them in Deuteronomy 4:36. Out of heaven he made thee hear his voice, that might instruct thee, and upon the earth he showed thee his great fire. His glory was in the heavens, but his fire and his power were upon the earth. Another explanation, he bent down the heavens and the heavens of heavens, and spread them out upon the mountain. Similarly, it states in Psalms 18:10, he bowed the heavens and came down.
I have so many questions right now.
He bent the firmament down to touch the top of the mountain so that he was still in heaven while being on the top of the mountain.
Yeah, so the firmament is this giant crystal dome, but God can make, like, it's made like molten glass, but God can just bend it down and I guess let it pop back up.
So we have a snow globe that he can just indent down to touch the big magic mountain, and then
maybe it's like made of like this plastic membrane or something. That's actually what the firmament is, not glass.
This is the bit that where Asterix and Obelix, when they travel to the Holy Land, like the sky is falling.
Yeah, I love them. Okay. Verse 23, do not make yourselves. So according to the Mechitah de Rabbi Ishmael, this phrase means, you shall not make an image of my ministers that minister before me in the heights. This commandment is generally viewed as prohibiting of creating statues of human figures. Casuto writes, this verse is not redundant even after the prohibition in the Decalogue. There, the general principle is stated forbidding the making of any likeness, whereas here, particular examples of the law are given. Even if the aim be to honor the God of Israel, and even if such precious metals as silver and gold be used, with which other nations do honor to their gods, you may not make any divine image. Even the most exquisite ornamentation cannot serve as a fitting symbol of the invisible God.
Well, we've broken that rule thousands of times.
That initially sounded to me like they were also prohibiting making images of their leaders, like, no statues of Moses or Aaron as, lawgivers and leader and first priests and so forth.
And I think Hebrew, if you look at the coinage, they don't normally have pictures of the kings on them. Instead, they would have a fruit or something.
That's why I think Islamic art is so beautiful.
Islamic art is completely without forms. Yeah.
Yeah.
calligraphy. Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely
like
gorgeous. Yeah.
the decorations of the insides of mosques and stuff can be amazing because it's using geometry and stuff. It's very cool.
Yeah, glorifying God without imitating anything God created.
I never ever mock an artist because it's just amazing the things they can do, even if it's.
And it shows that when you put limitations on art, when you say, okay, you can design this building, but you have this spending limit and this space limit and this structural limit, you end up making really interesting stuff.
Oh yeah.
Creativity is I agree. Creativity is
the most beautiful gift we have.
Stimulated by being pruned in some cases.
Yeah, that's it.
Now 24. Wherever I cause my name, etc. Avishur comments here. The most common opinion among scholars is that here a principle is established that the worshipping of God is allowed everywhere, unlike the approach of the author of Deuteronomy, according to which the worshipping is to be centered at only one place, in the place that the Lord will choose. This verse can be understood in the context of Mount Sinai that preceded it. The people received God's revelation on Mount Sinai and are about to depart from it. In order that they won't think that distancing from the mountain of God will distance them from him, they are told that God isn't connected to that mountain and nor in anywhere else. But wherever I cause my name to be honored, i.e. everywhere I want my name to be known, there will be worship in my honor. The Peshitta renders, you will commemorate my name instead of I cause, meaning you shall worship me by mentioning my name.
Yeah, so there are two things that we're looking at here, right? We're looking at centrality and there being an altar. So sometimes this is called like the law of the altar, right? But it doesn't need an altar, right? It can be anywhere, at least as it's shown here in Exodus. And as was pointed out, this is in contention with the passage in Deuteronomy, and I think altar and Romer actually noted that this is probably literally just written against that part in Deuteronomy. And actually this makes sense for an exilic date as well. If you don't have your temple, you got to be able to worship at everywhere. You don't need to have an altar. It doesn't need to be at this specific place. You can do it anywhere and just invoke the name.
And finally, 26. I have two comments here. So first, I Savage Ibn Ezra here. This is a thing now. Ben Suta says that bema'alot, by steps, comes from the same root as ma'al, trespass. However, he did not open his eyes and see that the mem in ma'al is a root letter, as vema'ale bomal and act unfaithfully against him in Numbers 5:12 proves. Ben Zuta clearly intended to ascend the ladder of wisdom with his follies. However, his nakedness was uncovered thereon. This is what happens to every heretic who does not believe in the words of our ancient sages. And to add to that, the original Hebrew of the last part is in rhymes. So it's a diss track.
Is the name of the guy he's dissing actually called Ben Sota?
Ben Zuta.
Oh, but does he call it Ben Sota?
Zuta.
Oh, because the word soita means a prostitute.
Oh.
Yeah. So we got a little.
Ben Sota is an insult.
Well, the thing is, it's starting to remind me of that passage about David and showing his nakedness during the dance, right? When he was around the Ark, I think.
Yes, when he danced before the Ark of the Covenant and Micah.
Are there other religious traditions?
2 Samuel 6.
Priests are supposed to walk with small steps.
Yeah, that reminds me of that other commandment that when you are wearing a short skirt and you're ascending stairs, do not twerk.
And finally, about your private parts may be exposed. Kasuto writes here, possibly the verse intends to oppose the practice of certain people in the ancient East, like the Sumerians, for instance, whose priests, on account of the conservatism that is customary in matters of worship, used to perform every ritual ceremony in a state of nakedness. Likewise, the Egyptian priests and even the Egyptian king, when he officiated in the sanctuary, used to wear only a linen ephod, a kind of short, primitive apron. The Israelite sense of modesty cannot tolerate such costumes, and as an added precaution, it further requires in 28:42 that the priests should wear drawers to cover their naked flesh, and these drawers shall reach from the loins to the thighs.
Oh God!
Where does this all come from?
The underpants.
Yeah, those are all those are both totally possible interpretations. Yeah, it could be like, oh, here, like the regular people that are basically naked in comparison to the priesthood, or to the against the actual other religions of the ancient Near East.
Seems a way of removing hierarchical clothing and showing off, and you all have to wear the simple linen ephod. But it reminds me of those horrible baptismal smocks that you did, the white ones that you'd end up wearing.
Oh yes.
Yeah, that's
Rare
the
bathing
priestly
suit
clothing
underneath.
is like white, simple linen. So they didn't want to be naked, but they still wanted them to be wearing.
I prefer the Greek tradition of glorifying their gods with glorious naked statues. Yeah. Although their junk was really small.
I'm sure they had stairs everywhere, those sluts.
Yeah. Ascending and descending stairs, showing their junk.
All right. Have we completed this
chapter? We did. I'm done.
Okay. So stay tuned next week as the list continues. They tell you there's 10 commandments, but it goes on. And
21 to 23 is the 21 to 23 is the Book of the Covenant, which is considered one of the earliest form of laws in the Bible. I've read at least maybe some. I don't remember. So yeah, it's interesting.
That sounds like something Stern would say.
Yeah, I find
this is so important. I read it, but I don't remember it.
It's not that important. I mean, Lawrence probably knows more than me, but
yeah, when it comes to the covenant stuff, yeah, there's definitely some debate about if this is the oldest legal portion of the Bible or not.
And bits of it, which we will get to next week, bits of it were directly lifted from Hammurabi's Stela of Law
and Hittite laws and the Shnuna. I will get to that. I have it all prepared. Yeah.
Looking forward to that genuinely. All right, so Exodus 21.
This is Blasphemer's Bible, and that we're talking about taking the Lord's name in vain and such in the Ten Commandments, and they used to be more blaspheming, right?
Jesus Christ,
I mean, I often get a dildo and name it after God. I don't know how much more blasphemous I can be.
Let's all swear by God.
Christ on a crutch.
Yeah.
Christ on a crutch.
Christ on a bicycle.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
Make sure everyone joins the Discord.
And watch Lawrence's show tomorrow morning.
Damn straight.
And his old stuff.
All right.
I have a lot to catch up on.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.